All right, motion carries. Jeannie's not here, so I'm writing all this down. All right, moving on to number 4. To approve the 2020-2021 working budget. Mr. Woods, welcome.
Good evening. How are you all?
Good, how are you?
Doing just fine. All right, so I provided you a couple of pieces of information that we're going to go over. One was the budget itself, and I also provided you some notes. We'll kind of start with the notes. Reminder, this is now the 3rd time you've seen this budget with changes. So we started in January with the draft. We moved in May with the tentative, and now this is the working budget, and in January we'll start all over again. So you have seen this budget in some form 2 other times at this point. So the working budget, it's still, the seat base is still at $4,000 per ADA. Our ADA that they are basing this off of is the 2018-19 end of year ADA with an adjustment for model, and that's 9,839.335. With this, and unsure of how the state is going to project growth from that point, we're not using any growth calculations for this budget. We'll wait and see how that goes, and if they'll do any kind of growth factor given being in COVID and some other issues, and potential state budget cuts that were discussed today in a meeting I was in. So we do have our increases from our assessments. I have factored those into this after our last, our tax meeting, our tax hearing, and factored in the assessments and the increases in tax income in this. The motor vehicle, actually, I mistyped that. It should be, while the assessments did rise on motor vehicle, we're holding it steady at where we projected it from the tentative budget. We, in building this budget, not knowing where we will land with tax collections, I did use a 96% collection rate for this budget. Our 10-year average is about 97 to 97.5, runs in that range. I did lower it just a little bit, expecting that as we've seen businesses struggle and other things, they may struggle a little bit on paying their tax bill, and we may have some delay in that. So I did build that factor in to this budget, and we'll monitor that as the year goes. We will adjust the working budget when we meet again and go over the draft and the tentative. We always adjust the working budget throughout the year. I did put a slight increase in here on utility taxes after we got through the end of the year and looked at our collections and our historical rates. We are doing a slight increase on the utility taxes from where we had it in the tentative. This budget does reflect about a 1% increase due to step and rank changes for people. There's no increase in the retirement this year due to COVID, so the rate there remained at 24.06, but the legislature can pull that at any time. Due to the way the law is written, they can increase that 12% per year. They are holding that steady. They've set the rates this year without that 12% increase, but looking forward, we'll have to be prepared for that as we go. This budget does not have additional staff beyond our needs at this point, so we're not building anything additional into this. We do have our 10 buses that keeps us on schedule built into this budget. You'll notice as we go through here, we're not projecting using any capital funds, making a capital funds request to cover any of our general fund expenditures. This is a balanced budget. Tight budget, but it is a balanced budget. Just some notes there. The continuation of our nursing staff that the board made a decision last year to increase and take on a bigger cost there. That's a additional $350,000 every year out of the general fund. Again, this is a balanced budget. We're not using our contingency funds. We did at the end of the year, we upped our contingency funds to plan for the future, knowing that we may hit potential costs that we have to cover due to COVID. So I have been able to balance this budget without showing us dipping into those at this time. As always, we have additional considerations to keep in mind. If we did experience a tremendous amount of growth, you can see there how much a teacher and a paraeducator costs to add. One of the items there I've listed is how, and we've already mentioned, how does COVID affect our tax collections overall? We're going to see a full year potentially of COVID issues. So as businesses and individuals, struggle throughout the year, we could see hits on our tax collection rates. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I'll keep the board very informed on where we're at with that. State budget cuts, again, I was in a finance officer meeting today, and they started discussing the state revenue and the potential for all the different departments have been asked to figure out how they can withstand an 8% budget cut. They are projecting to keep SEEK intact and the debt service money that they've promised. But from there, we'll probably see some of our other more flexible funds, ESS, things of that nature. We'll probably see a hit in those. The Friskies, we potentially, they're out of a different department. KDE does not control them. Their funding flows from Cabinet for Health Services, so it depends on what that cabinet decides to do with the funding. But those are potentials that we've got to brace for going forward. As always, we have to watch our risk management costs, our general liability, fleet, and workers' comp. Especially workers' comp, you have a slip, trip, or fall, it could potentially reset your rates, and we always are mindful of those. And all of our schools do a really good job of discussing safety measures within their school with all their staff and everybody, and trying to keep everybody safe and to help keep our rates lower. Fuel costs, will they remain the same as last year? Well, keep having hurricanes and they keep hitting the production out there, we could see costs actually rise. Who knows with fuel costs? We've saved some because buses haven't been running for a while, but that remains to be seen. We've projected them fairly flat in this budget. Medicaid revenues, they keep talking about the new expanded billing. We've had some advice. I've met with some people on the state level about that, and right now they're advising us to take it slow and get it set up properly. So the expanded, we probably won't see much from that this year. It'll probably take a year before we start realizing any money out of that. But as always, when you're getting budget cuts, whether they be state or federal, you have to be mindful that Medicaid could be something that gets cut. Property assessments from here on out, we don't know if they'll be really good next year, if they'll be down. Hopefully we'll know sooner than later with all of that, and can project pretty well. Potential uses of contingency funds to balance budgets, we haven't had to do that. We don't plan on doing that, but it's always something to keep in mind as we move forward. We've already talked about potential cuts, any kind. Pension reform, there's always potential out there for them to do more pension reform. And, the last one, like we talked about with the CERS, they built in a annual 12% increase. They could always do that, which hits the district pretty hard if they decide to increase those.
Mr. Reed, that is of the gross salaries?
Yes. 24.06% of the gross salaries, and that's our classified staff. is the CERS side.
Thank you.
Had we had to budget the 12% in this general fund, it would have been about a $300,000 commitment. So it's each 12% is about $300,000 that we have to plan for annually. Not been as much talk about this over the past year, at least. Voucher programs and tax incentives and charter movements. That's always out there lurking. Career centers. We're getting ready to open, 2 new career centers. So potential recurring costs there of $300,000 by the time you staff them, with the few extras. That could be a potential that we need to brace for. The CSEP program, we talked about that it's still viable right now, but there will come a time when the chemical weapons are all destroyed and they move out, and we do have an arrangement with them to lease buses. So, that would have an impact on our budget, as well as if we had students that moved out because their parents were seeking jobs elsewhere. Safety requirements, as they become mandatory, a lot of the School Safety and Resiliency Act has a little clause that as funding becomes available, so as they start to roll out more and, KDE and the state put out a little bit of money on that, they could ask us to fund part of that ourselves. So we have to be mindful that those requirements are still out there, and we will have to, at some point, address those as the state rolls those out. And then always we need to be looking at how we fund future increases, and how do we generate more revenue, and how do we continue to provide a high level of service to our students. So those are the general notes for this budget. With the copy that you received earlier in the week, I did try to make notes out in the columns for you. So what I'll do is we'll kind of go through there and hit the highlights of those, and then I'll open it up for you all to ask questions, because I think it might be more beneficial than me. You can see this right here. This is our actual budget. This is the line item budget. Nina's been through part of it. I've spent many countless hours on that. We always, the first place we start with the budget is looking at employees. Within this budget, it's 74% of our general fund budget, our salary and fringe benefits. So, it's a good portion of your budget. So that's the first place we start, and we have to make sure everybody, A, is accounted for, so we have them in our system, and B, they're in the right location. C, are they out of the right funding source? So there's some other coding things that we have to go through. I've spent the last 2 weeks looking at reports of all 2,000 people. And Nina's went behind me and found the places that I dropped a few people here and there, but on coding. But we've got everybody accounted for. Everybody's in the right location. So I feel pretty good about that part. All right, so starting on page 1, you'll see with the way the report's laid out, you got your prior 2 fiscal years. Those are your actuals of what we actually did. And then the third column there of numbers, that's the working budget for this year. The unassigned, we are starting with what we planned on ending with, what we did show you as ending with for the end of fiscal year 20, and that's bringing the contingency fund up to $7.2 million. So, and you will see as we go down through there when we get to the end of the expenditures that that's the same number we'll end with and not use any contingency funds. The rest of that is reserved for encumbrances, and those are POs that, we'd made the order, but the items had not come in at the end of the year, so we carry those funds over and put them into this year because that's when the check will actually be cut. And then the rest is site-based carryover that you all approved for the school's allocation. Moving down to the property taxes, you'll see that we've built in an increase of approximately 740,600 versus the tentative. At the tentative, we left it flat because we didn't know what assessments were. As Dr. Gillum discussed during the tax hearing, it was about $1.25 million net increase or gross increase in our taxes. What we're actually able to build into the general fund budget is $740,600. Part of that is because our nickels, our FSPK building fund, we have, when tax assessments go up and we have more tax money, we also have to put more money over there. And that was approximately $476,000 of our tax money had to go there. We have no choice. It's a requirement because those are set taxes and have to be used for building. So what we had available to us to put in the general fund budget is the $740,000. We've left the MOTAX the same, motor vehicle, as the tentative budget. There was no reason to increase it. You can see the increase there of $200,000 to the utility tax at the bottom of the page. The next section, page 3, if you'll move over to page 3, and your all's is front and back. I guess I should have mentioned that I did copy your copy front and back. I am lowering the interest on investments. Just looking at current market rates and just being conservative there, I want to make sure that we don't overshoot based on how the rates. So I did reduce that by $50,000. Moving down the page, you see textbook rentals. That money is the money, part of the money that we charge at the schools through school fees at the high schools. So I have taken that down to zero since the board did approve to waive school fees for this year. So we did take that line item out. Moving on down to the SEEK program. That is our big state money. You can see that we are compared to tentative, we are projecting the reduction of $311,936. In looking at that, I went back and looked through, and there's always a question of how that happens, how it works out. So looking at how SEEK is calculated, when your assessments go up, your local effort increases. So our local effort increased by $257,000 from the tentative. So there's a big reason why $311,000. Part of it was our local effort. The other part comes in what's known as state tier 1, and that's their equalization factor, where they try to make everybody across the state equal. And the remainder of that money was a reduction in that equalization. Again, when they look at your district and say, well, you have more local money available, we don't equalize you as strong. So that dropped, and that is a add-in that they do onto the SEEK. So it did drop, so that's the remainder of your money. It makes up the $311,000 from the point that we were at when we looked at the tentative budget. Moving on, I'm going to take you to page 6. The fed through intermediary source, that is, as we talked about the CSEP, we've got an outstanding invoice with them. It takes them a little while because they have to request the money from the feds. So the fiscal court, we bill them for our money. They then have to turn around and bill the Fed for the money, and they have to wait for it to come in to then reimburse us on that lease. So that's a full year plus a half year. We billed them in March of last year for half of the year, and so I did increase that to show that outstanding money that will come in. We kept Medicaid the same because, again, unsure of how federal cuts could potentially hit down the road. On page 7, the overall revenues of $1,905,866,645.66. That's a net increase of $680,000 versus the tentative. And we'll kind of go over some of the areas in the expenditure starting on page 8 of where we had to build that money and what we needed it for. One of the items we always discuss is the admin rate. It's budgeted in here at 13% for this particular budget. And some of that's due to just budgeting in different supplies and other things that we potentially could need to cover costs and needs for COVID. Some of those items would be administrative programs that we've had to get to take care of things that are not part of CARES funding. The first area that, like I said, we started with salary. So there are some increases in salary as compared to the budget. The biggest being in instruction, and it's up almost $260,000. A big reason for that is we have met some Section 7 requests in this, and it's about 6 positions, and that helps the schools to maintain adequate staffing and social distancing as we start bringing children back in. So there are some additional, they were approved as part of their original allocations, and when we started looking at numbers, they were still needed, so those are considered Section 7 requests because we want to make sure that they have plenty of staffing to meet the needs as we bring kids back into the building. Moving on down to page 9. On supplies under instructional staff support services, did increase that about $240,000. A lot of that's technology and items we need that's funded on top of the CARES, so we're making sure that we have plenty of money in the budget to try and take care of the needs of our students. An item to always point out, you'll see the note down there further on the page, employee benefits under district admin support look really, really high, and that's because we budget all of our general liability, workers' comp, dental, and unemployment for the entire district in that one category. As they spend it throughout the year, it's spread among all the different functions, so it's actually spent in different places, but it's easier for us to track to have this one category to budget it all in. Page 11, the supplies line for plant and operations and maintenance for function 2600. That's all your facilities, all of our facilities, that's utilities as part of that. We also increased that approximately $135,000 just to add some room for any potential PPE and cleaning supplies we might need on top of what we're funding through CARES or getting FEMA reimbursement. Again, with the FEMA reimbursement, we do have to remember, and they're tightening that up. That was part of the meeting I had today. They're getting really, really tight on what they're wanting to reimburse the districts for. It is a match. They only do 75% of your cost of anything they approve. So we would have to provide some of that in our expenditure. So I've left us room there to cover some of that. You'll see moving down the page under student transportation that we do have 10 buses still budgeted. It looks really high because, again, it's one of those POs that cross fiscal years. We have to order the buses at the time we order them. We order them in June. They usually do not come in until about December, that we actually get the buses built and in our hand, available for use, and that's the time that we pay the bill. So that PO crosses and we increase our budget there to make sure there's enough budgeted for the encumbrance. Moving on through page 13, the big item there, you can see, as I said, we are not projecting using any of our contingency funds at this time. We are going to end with what we started with, the $7.2 million, which is really good. I'm very hopeful that that's where we're going to land for the year. While it is a tight budget, we've left us some room to take care of our additional needs for supplies and other things, and we've accounted for staff really well. We've combed through that, and we think it's a good budget overall, given the information that we have and trying to predict how COVID will affect any of our expenditures for the year. I'll stop right there. Those are the main items, major items I wanted to go through. The rest of the budget that you have, most of those federal funds that the schools have sent us budgets for those. You have your building funds in 310 and 320. I will point out on page, if you look at page 30, that is the nickels that we talked about, and there is an increase there from the tentative. And then on 31, the state equalization match, which did decrease a little bit from the tentative. Again, they expect that we have more money because our assessments went up, so they decrease our match just a little bit. So now I will open it up. Since you all have had time to go through, and I've kind of hit the highlights of the major areas that have changed since the tentative, I will open up the floor for questions.
As he went along. Hit the points.
Yeah. I think it's very helpful that you give us the
Yeah.
summary page and then you outline it all for us in the blue. Makes it a lot easier for us.
And Dr. Gillum, you feel really comfortable with this budget?
Yes, I mean, it is a conservative budget. I mean, but I think budgeting, and Mark will probably agree with this, budgeting this year is probably the most odd that we've done in a long time, because there's so many unknowns right now. However, while there's not many unknowns, there's so many unknowns, the unknowns are on both sides of the piece. Typically, we know our expenses pretty well, and we know those things that we can control, and those things that where we need to to be very mindful as we approach the middle or end of the year. And sometimes it's the revenues that are a little shaky. Well, currently, the revenues are quite shaky. We feel that we're good. As Mr. Woods mentioned, he moved down to a 95% collection rate, which we feel is going to be okay. Particularly when you look at local, our local residential market is pretty solid right now. Okay. If you've tried to buy or sell a house here lately, you know what I'm talking about. However, the side of the coin that's uncertain is the commercial side of it, and so that's what we're concerned in terms of our collections of that. We have some bankruptcies and some other pieces from businesses that can certainly impact that side. And then he mentioned the state cuts. They say they're going to hold at this point holding Seek harmless, which is good. However, there's a trickle-down piece on the other side of that with our general fund. For example, when he talked about those flex focus funds with the ESS, some of the other pieces, as those things get cut, those are the monies that typically go straight out to our schools. Well, as those things get cut, that means our schools have less money. So when our schools need stuff, we have to take that money from general fund and fund that. So although it's not a direct seat cut to the general fund, it's kind of a backdoor cut to us. So those two pieces are a little questionable. However, we put a little additional money in our contingency this past year, knowing that the situation we were facing this current year. And as well, one thing that makes this budget we feel pretty good about is because we're already, we're almost effectively in October. So that's kind of the good thing is we're rolling. And so those pieces kind of pulled together, and the fact that we're not projecting right now to dip into that contingency. So if things do get tight, we do have a little bit of contingency there to pull. So I feel very, very comfortable with our finances for this current year. Yes.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Woods? Wonderful job, then.
Thank you.
All right, then I need a motion to approve the 2020-2021 working budget as follows. The general fund, $109,586,645.66. Special revenue funds, $11,877,142.64. District activity funds, $1,030,513.61. Capital outlay fund, $986,434. KSPK fund, $12,474,611. Construction fund, $3,867,678.61. Debt service fund, $10,255,315.76. Food service funds, $10,917,469.21. Is there someone who can make the motion?
So moved.
The motion's been made by Mrs. Coyle. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, the motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries.
Thank you.
Moving in to our agenda, number 5. We're going to enter into executive session. So I need a motion to enter into executive session to discuss potential litigation for which disclosure would compromise all of the things that we're going to talk about. So I need a motion for that, please.
I second.
All right, the motion's been made by Mr. Rutherford and the second by Mrs. Cobb. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries. We're now in executive session. All right. Number 6 on our agenda is to come out of the executive session. I need a motion for that, please. Motion's been made by Mrs. Coyle, second by Mr. Rutherford. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries. There's nothing to discuss as we come out of our executive session, so we'll move on our agenda to number 7, to adjourn. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So motion's been made by Mrs. Brock, second by Mrs. Cobb. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries, we're adjourned. I can do it really loud, no one's here.
I think you did your last time, you went bam, bam, bam.